The document is already burning when I walk in. No, that is not right. That comes later. That is the end of the story, and I am getting ahead of myself. Because even now, even with everything that has followed, that is the image my mind returns to first. The flame catching the edge of the paper, the dark wax seal running like a wound. The way he held it over the china dessert plate, without flourish, without performance, as though burning a document at a formal dinner were simply a thing a person does when the situation requires it. But I am ahead of myself. Let me begin where it actually begins. The document is on the desk when I arrive. It is a cold November morning. The kind that smells of coal smoke and coming frost. The kind that makes the stones of London look older and grayer than they already are. A thin man named Mr. Terence Webb is standing at the door of our townhouse at precisely 8 o'clock when I come downstairs. And he tells me, in the careful, bloodless voice of a man who has delivered bad news so many times it has become a professional skill, that my presence is required. Required, not requested, not invited. Required the way a tool is required when someone has a use for it. If someone has ever made you feel like a tool instead of a person, like your only value was what you could solve for them, type tool in the comments right now, because this story was written for you. And don't go anywhere, because the man who walks through that door in about 60 seconds is going to change everything. I am 22 years old. My name is Clara Ashby, second daughter of the Earl of Ashby. And in this family, that designation has always meant precisely this, second. After my sister, Dorothea, who is beautiful and golden, and was made for ballrooms and the attentions of titled men. After the estate's debts, which come before everything, including daughters. After my father's reputation, which must be preserved at all costs, including at the cost of honesty. Mr. Webb leads me into the solicitor's office on Chancery Lane, and the first thing I notice, because I notice everything, because noticing has always been the only power available to me, is that there are 2 chairs arranged on the opposite side of the desk, not 1, 2, as though a second person is expected. The second thing I notice is the document. It sits in the center of the desk with the particular authority of a paper that has already decided something. There is a seal on it I do not recognize. Not my father's. Something older, more formal. A bird with its wings spread wide, pressed into dark wax, dried and set and permanent. The third thing I notice is that Mr. Webb has not sat down. And I understand, before the door opens, before the footstep sounds in the corridor, before my life rearranges itself around a single moment I will never be able to unlive, that something has already happened to me. Something was decided in a room I was not invited into, by people who did not think to ask. They never ask. The door opens. The man who steps through it is tall. That is the first thing I register because it is the most immediate. He fills the door frame the way weather fills a window, and the room recalibrates itself around his presence without asking anyone's permission. He wears a dark coat, precisely cut, no ornamentation, except the single brass button at the cuff that catches the candlelight for half a second before he moves past it. He carries himself the way men carry themselves when they have seen actual danger, a quietness that is not stillness, like something coiled, awake, ready, but not anxious about it. He is perhaps 34. His hair is dark, short at the sides. His jaw carries a scar, left side running from just below the ear to the corner of the mouth, not disfiguring. The kind of mark that makes a face interesting rather than perfect. He is not what anyone would call handsome in the conventional drawing room sense. He is the sort of man who looks at things carefully. He looks at the document on the desk. He looks at Mr. Webb, who seems to shrink slightly under the inspection. He looks around the room, a swift, comprehensive inventory, the kind of look that costs nothing and misses nothing. And then he looks at me. He stops, not the way men stop when they see Dorothea. That is a different kind of stopping, the pause of a person encountering something they wish to acquire. This man stops the way you stop when the map you've been carrying doesn't match the road in front of you. When you expected one thing and found another entirely. You are not Miss Dorothea Ashby, he says. His voice is exactly what I expected from the rest of him. Low, deliberate, not unkind. No, I say. I am her sister, Clara. He does not flinch. He does not do anything so undignified as look surprised, though I am certain he is. He simply looks at me for a moment, long enough for me to feel it, not long enough to be rude, and then he turns his attention to Mr. Webb. Mr. Webb, he says. Explain, Mr. Webb explains. I listen to it the way you listen to a building falling, with a kind of numb, total horror that your body has not yet caught up to. The contract, the original betrothal, signed 3 years prior by my father and the Duke's solicitors when Dorothea was 19, and the London season had produced no results, and the Ashby debts had grown to a number my father could not say aloud without his hands shaking. A financial arrangement, Mr. Webb calls it, as though that makes it smaller, as though calling a cage a room changes the bars. The Duke of Ravenscroft, that is this man's name. Edmund Ravenscroft. He has been abroad for 3 years. The continent, then, a posting near the cavalry lines in the south of France that he apparently arranged himself, and that has left the scar on his jaw and a particular stillness in his eyes that no English drawing room ever produced. He was meant to return and marry Dorothea. He is meant to return and marry me. Because, and here is where the building finishes falling, Dorothea broke the arrangement 4 months ago. Secretly, without informing the Duke, without informing me. She broke it because she had found Lord Reginald Cavendish, second son of a marquess, richer than our father, younger than Edmund, thoroughly besotted with her, in the way that Edmund Ravenscroft had never quite managed to be. She wanted Cavendish. So she went to our father and told him she would not honor the contract. Our father, faced with a breach that would expose the original financial terms and humiliate him publicly, did what Lord Ashby always does in a crisis. He found a solution that cost someone else everything and cost himself nothing at all. He substituted me. The contract was amended. Clara Ashby, second daughter of the Earl of Ashby, in place of Dorothea, first daughter. The same name, the same title. A different woman slotted into the gap like a peg carved to fit a hole that was never meant for her. I sit very still. I am very good at sitting still. I have had years of practice. When Mr. Webb finishes speaking, the room is quiet except for the clock ticking somewhere behind me. The coal in the grate has burned low, and the November cold comes through the window glass in slow, patient waves. The Duke of Ravenscroft has not moved. He is still standing. He never sat, I notice, and I will later understand. This is a deliberate choice, the choice of a man who does not wish to be at a disadvantage, and his face is doing something careful, not angry, not cold, something I cannot name yet because I do not know him well enough to read it. He is the only person in my life, I realize, whose face I cannot yet read. I find that both frightening and, in some buried, inarticulate way, interesting. Miss Ashby, he says at last. Your Grace, I say. Did you know? 4 words. Such a simple question. And in those 4 words is the only question in this room that matters. Not whether the contract is valid. Not whether my father has committed something close to fraud. Whether I knew. Whether I was part of it. Nobody in my life has ever asked me that. Not once in 22 years has anyone looked at me in the middle of a disaster and thought to ask whether I was a participant or a casualty. No, I say. 1 word. But I mean it the way you mean a door slamming. Hard. Final. True. Hit the like button right now if you felt that. 1 word. That's all it took for him to see her completely. Subscribe if you aren't already, because this is only the first room. We have a long way still to go. He nods. That is all. He nods, and then he picks up the contract from the desk and reads it. Standing there in the cold light of the November morning, reading every line with the same careful attention he gave the room when he entered it, without hurry, without performance. When he reaches a page he wants to re-examine, he simply turns back to it, without apology. He does not look at Mr. Webb for reassurance. He does not look at me. He is, for this moment, entirely absorbed in understanding what is in front of him. I respect that. Even now, with my heart hammering in my ears and my future arranged around me like a room I did not choose, I respect it. When he finishes reading, he sets the document down. I will not sign anything today, he says to Mr. Webb. I require a private conversation with Miss Ashby. Mr. Webb looks scandalized. Your Grace, the proprieties. I am aware of the proprieties, Edmund says. The proprieties did not appear to concern Miss Ashby's father when he substituted one daughter for another without informing either party. I will speak with her. You may wait outside. Mr. Webb leaves. I am alone with the Duke of Ravenscroft, and the contract between us, and the dying coal in the grate, and the clock that has not stopped ticking for a single moment since this morning began dismantling my life. He pulls the second chair, the one that was left for someone who never came, around the desk and sits, not behind the desk, but beside it. Level with me, angled slightly, so that we can speak face to face without the formality of the furniture between us. That single choice tells me something important about him. I want to understand what you know, he says, and what you want, in that order. I have found that those 2 things are different more often than people expect. I look at him for a long moment. What I know, I say, is that this contract was written without my knowledge or consent. What I want. I stop. He waits. He has a remarkable gift for waiting. Not impatiently, not performatively. He simply waits, the way a person waits who genuinely intends to hear the answer when it comes. I don't know what I want, I say at last. I have never been asked before. I'll need a moment to work out what the honest answer is. Something moves across his face, brief, and I almost miss it. But I am very good at reading faces, and what I see, just for that fraction of a second, is not pity, it is recognition. He has heard that sentence before. Not from another person, from himself. Take all the time you need, he says. The November light comes through the window in slow, gray angles, and I think, this is the most honest conversation I have had in years, with a stranger, with the man who may or may not become my husband, in a room that smells of ink and old wax, while my life waits outside the door. This is how it begins. If this story has already reached into your chest and taken hold, you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss what comes next. And drop a comment. Just your name and where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story is traveling. Now let's go deeper. I look at the scar on his jaw. In the candlelight, it catches a thin edge of gold. I find myself wondering what it cost him. Not in pain, but in the other currency that scars demand. The kind that doesn't show on skin. You were engaged to my sister, I say. Not accusatory, just establishing the geography of the situation. A contract was signed on my behalf, he says. Whether it constituted an engagement in any meaningful sense is something I spent considerable time in France not thinking about. There is the faintest trace of dryness in his voice. Not quite a joke, the shadow of one. And now the contract names me, I say. It does. A pause. How do you feel about that? I consider lying. I could perform the gracious deference that has been my armor since childhood. Oh, I am glad to serve my family, of course, whatever is required. I could arrange my face into the soft, agreeable mask I have learned to wear in rooms where my opinion is not wanted. But he asked, did you know? He asked, what do you want? He pulled the chair around to my side of the desk. Honestly, I say. I only deal in honesty, he says. I find it saves considerable time. Then, honestly, I say, I feel as though the ground has given way beneath me, and I have not yet landed anywhere. I feel like a letter that has been addressed to the wrong person and cannot be returned. He is quiet for a moment. That, he says carefully, is not an entirely inaccurate description of my own position. He looks at the contract. I will not compel you. I want you to understand that clearly. This contract is legally questionable at best. Substitution without the knowledge of the primary party, which is me, creates grounds for nullification. I can pursue that, or, I say, or we can proceed, but not in the dark. He meets my eyes. I will tell you exactly what this arrangement means to me, what I will and will not expect of you. And then, Clara, he uses my name for the first time, and I feel it settle somewhere in my chest, like a key turning in a lock I forgot was there. Then you will tell me what you want, and I will listen. Clara, not Miss Ashby, not second daughter, not the substitute. My name plain and whole, in a voice that treats it as though it matters. I straighten in my chair. Tell me, I say. He tells me. He tells me about the political pressure he has faced since returning to England, the family lands in 3 counties that require management, the seat in the House of Lords that his opponents have used his prolonged absence to undermine, the social necessity of a wife before the spring season. He tells me this plainly, without sentiment, without the flattery a man attempting to seduce me would employ. He is not seducing me. He is informing me. There is a difference, and he knows it. He tells me what he will not require. He will not require performance. He will not demand she appear happy when she is not, or pleased when she is not, or in love when she is not. He has seen enough performance in the years since he was first made eligible to last 3 lifetimes. He will require honesty. He will require the management of his household, which is considerable. He will require her presence at the formal gatherings that his position demands. Everything else, he says, looking directly at me, is negotiable. When he finishes, he says, "Now, what do you want?" I have been sitting with the question while he spoke, turning it over like a coin that might have 2 different faces. I want a library, I say, a real one, with Latin texts and not just the decorative editions men put on shelves with the appearance of learning. I want to not be sent away from rooms when the conversation becomes interesting. I pause. I want to be spoken to as you are speaking to me now, as though what I think has weight. I stop. I am aware that I have said considerably more than was safe. He looks at me, not startled. Something more considered than startled. Ravenscroft Park has a library that takes up the entire east wing, he says. The Latin texts are largely unread. You are welcome to rectify that. He pauses. And I have never in my life sent someone away from a room because they were too intelligent. I look down at my hands. I had prepared myself for contempt, for the cold efficiency of a man treating a woman as a contract obligation. I had prepared myself for everything except this, a man who seems to be, against all probability, genuinely interested in what I have to say. I will agree to proceed, I say at last, carefully, on the terms you have described, with the understanding that if those terms change, I will say so. Fair, he says. He stands. He picks up the contract. Mr. Webb will need to note that I have reviewed the amendment. We will have a formal meeting with your father. A pause, very dry. I have several questions for your father. I almost smile. Only almost. But it is the first time in this entire morning that I have come anywhere close to it. He sees it. I can tell he does, because that same brief, careful thing crosses his face. Not quite a smile, but its intention. The shape of one, deliberately held back. He goes to the door and opens it. Mr. Webb is hovering outside with the expression of a man who pressed his ear against a door and found it too thick to be useful. We will require a further meeting, the Duke tells him, with Lord Ashby present. He does not add anything to that. He does not need to. The temperature of the sentence does the work entirely. I stand. The contract is still on the desk. The dark wax seal with the bird, wings spread, sharp-eyed, watches me as I walk toward the door. I pass so close to Edmund Ravenscroft that I can smell the cold winter air still clinging to his coat, and the faint mineral scent of horses and long road. He is real. That is what I think, inexplicably, in that passing moment. He is entirely disquietingly real. I need to know. Are you already feeling what Clara is feeling and pretending you're not? Drop real in the comments, just that one word. Because I think you know exactly what I mean. Now, let's go deeper. The door closes behind us, and I carry the question he asked me. Did you know, all the way home in the carriage, turning it in my hands like a coin, I am only beginning to understand has two faces. And both of them are worth something. Dorothea is waiting for me when I return. She is in the blue sitting room. Her sitting room, the good one, with the view of the garden, and the pale French wallpaper that cost more than the household's quarterly food bill. She is wearing ivory silk that makes her golden hair look lit from within. And she is doing needlework she has no interest in because it gives her hands something to do while she constructs her position. I want to be honest about Dorothea because it would be easy and deeply dishonest to diminish her in retrospect. She is beautiful, the kind of beautiful that stops conversations and changes the quality of light in a room when she enters it. She is also, behind that beauty, one of the most calculating people I have ever known. And I say that not with hatred, but with something closer to exhausted admiration. She learned to be calculating the same way I learned to be invisible, because the system we were both raised inside offered us no other tools and punished us for wanting different ones. How was it? She asks. Her voice is bright and unconcerned, the voice she uses when she already knows the answer and is testing whether I've worked it out. You knew, I say, not a question, a statement laid on the floor between us. Her needlework pauses for exactly 1 second, then continues. Father explained the necessity, she says. It was the most sensible arrangement. You are not spoken for, Clara. You have had 2 seasons with no. Say it plainly, Dorothea. She looks up at me. Her eyes are a very clear, very pale blue, and in them, I can see the thing she almost never allows anyone to see. That she knows exactly what she has done, and that the knowing sits in her like a stone she has carefully arranged all her prettiness around. I couldn't marry him, she says, and her voice, for a fraction of a moment, loses its polish entirely. Reginald loves me. Edmund Ravenscroft he is a duty, Clara. He is a man who made it entirely clear, through 3 years, and not a single letter, that our arrangement was business to him. I didn't want to be someone's business. Reginald, what Reginald is or isn't, I say quietly, has nothing to do with whether what you did to me was right. She looks at me for a long moment. I know, she says, 2 words, and in them is something almost tender, something almost like grief. She is not. I force myself to remember without feeling. She is a person who was shown, from girlhood, that her value was her appearance and her match, and who built her entire architecture of self around that fact. She is not purely cruel. She is incomplete in a different way than I am. We were both failed, just by different mechanisms. I don't tell her this. It is too large a thing for this room, on this day. I've agreed to proceed, I say instead. Her face shifts, very slightly. You agreed. Something that is not quite concern but is adjacent to it moves behind her pale eyes. Clara, you must be careful with him. He has a reputation for. He is not a warm man. He is not Reginald. No, I say. He is not Reginald. He was, in fact, the only person in that room who bothered to ask whether I wanted to be there. I leave her in the blue sitting room with her needlework and her pale eyes and her stone of guilt, and I go upstairs and sit at my writing table, and I stare at the wall for a long time, because I need to understand what has just happened to me, and whether it is a disaster or a door, and the terrifying truth is that I cannot yet tell. The answer, I am beginning to suspect, is that it is both. The meeting with my father 3 days later is, by any measure, one of the most unpleasant mornings of my adult life. And I have had some very unpleasant mornings. Edmund arrives at Ashby House at precisely 10 o'clock, not 5 past, not a quarter to 10. I note this, because punctuality, in my experience, is one of the ways people show you whether they take you seriously. My father is frequently late to things involving me. My father has positioned himself in the library, not because he reads, but because it is the most impressive room, the one with the most authority arranged into it. He is wearing his best morning coat and his most conciliatory expression, the one he uses on creditors when they are being difficult, the one that says, "I am a reasonable man. Surely we can resolve this like gentlemen. Surely this unpleasantness need not become permanent." I sit in the corner. I am not asked to leave. This surprises me. It will take me some weeks to understand that Edmund requested I remain, deliberately, because he does not conduct business that concerns me without me present. It is such an ordinary thing, that principle. I will spend months understanding why it felt extraordinary. Edmund does not perform conciliation. He sits, takes the chair my father positioned to face the light, to disadvantage whoever occupied it, and simply turns it 6 inches so the light no longer works against him. It is such a small movement. It is, I will later think, one of the most telling things I have ever witnessed in this house. "Lord Ashby," he says, The amendment to the contract is legally irregular. You substituted one party without the knowledge of the other principal parties. That is a deficiency. I am willing to proceed despite it, on conditions. My father begins to explain himself. He uses the word necessity 4 times in the first 2 minutes. He explains the debts, not their true catastrophic scope, but a carefully managed version. He explains Dorothea's happiness, Dorothea's feelings, Dorothea's future. He does not once explain my happiness, my feelings, my future. Edmund lets him finish. Your conditions for her settlement, Edmund says then, cutting directly past everything my father has said as though it were merely ornamental. I want them amended. Whatever was agreed for Miss Dorothea Ashby transfers to Clara, plus an independent income, sufficient for her to live separately should she ever choose to. Not a large sum, a dignified one. My father's face does something complicated. Your Grace, that is not the standard. I am not interested in the standard, Edmund says. I am interested in the specific. Your daughter is entering this arrangement without having consented to it originally. That requires remedy. This is my remedy. A pause. It is not negotiable. My father agrees. He agrees the way men agree, when they have no choice, and wish to pretend otherwise. Quickly, with an air of generosity, as though he is doing the offering rather than the accepting. But he agrees. I sit in my corner and I keep very still and I think, Edmund Ravenscroft just gave me a door out. He met me for the first time 4 days ago, and he gave me a door. That is not a small thing. I have been in rooms with men my entire life, and not one of them has ever thought to give me a door. After the formal business concludes, and my father has excused himself with much relief, Edmund remains. He looks at me, across the library. My father's library, filled with books I have read in secret since I was 9 years old. Books that line the walls, like a silent audience who have witnessed everything and said nothing. You read them, he says, not a question. He is looking at the shelves with the eye of someone who knows the difference between a decorative library and a working one. Yes, I say. All of them? Most of them. A pause. My father doesn't know. He believes the only person who enters this room is himself. Edmund turns and looks at me again with that particular quality of attention. The kind that does not flatten you into a type, but reads you as a specific person, individual and complete. It is uncomfortable in the way that being genuinely seen is always uncomfortable, when you are not accustomed to it. Ravenscroft Park, he says, has approximately 3,000 books in the East Wing Library. I would say most of them have been read, but my sister was the one who read them, not me. She died 2 years ago. He says it plainly. No flourish, no performance of grief. The way a person says a true thing they have made their peace with in the rational part of their mind, while the rest of them has not entirely followed. I'm sorry, I say. And I mean it. Not the social meaning, the actual one. He nods. Her name was Lily, he says. She would have found you interesting. I do not know what to do with that. I hold it very carefully, the way you hold a glass object whose value you are only beginning to understand. We will travel to Ravenscroft Park within the fortnight, he says, resuming, the practical in the way that grief sometimes requires. I should like you to see it before any formal announcements are made. If you find it intolerable, I would rather know before we are publicly committed. And if I find it tolerable, then we proceed, he says. Step by step, step by step. There is a modesty in that phrase, a refusal to promise more than can be delivered, that I tuck away carefully. Not a declaration, not a grand gesture, a pace, an honesty about what we are and what we are not yet. He is about to leave when the library door opens. It is not my father. It is Dorothea. She has dressed with extraordinary care. The deep blue silk, the deliberate arrangement of golden hair, the positioning in the doorway where the hall light catches her to best advantage. She looks, in this moment, exactly like the portrait of herself she carries in her mind at all times and spends considerable energy making real. Edmund, she says, not your grace. His given name, easy and familiar, as though 3 years and not a single letter are simply a thing that happened between people who remain close. Edmund turns and looks at her. I watch his face with everything I have. There is nothing there that I would call attraction. Nothing cold either, no hostility, no visible wound. What is there? Very precisely, is the expression of a man who sees a performance and understands that he is not the audience it was designed for. He is courteous, perfectly calibrated, and entirely unmoved. Miss Ashby, he says, her formal title, warm but measured. I see in Dorothea's face the half-second when she registers it, when she understands that she is Miss Ashby and I have somehow, in the space of 4 days, become Clara. It is brief. She rebuilds her smile immediately, but I saw it. I wanted to wish you. Well, she says, addressing Edmund, but with her eyes briefly on me. I know this must be an adjustment for everyone. An adjustment, Edmund says pleasantly. Yes. Good day, Miss Ashby. He leaves the room. Dorothea and I stand alone in the library, in the quiet that follows his exit, with all those books watching. She is still wearing her best smile, but it is working considerably harder now than it was 3 minutes ago. You've made an impression, she says at last. He is a fair man, I say. She looks at me for a moment. Something flickers behind her very clear blue eyes. Something I might, if I were less careful, mistake for regret. Be careful, Clara. Men who seem fair often simply haven't been tested yet. I look at my sister, this woman who grew up beside me, who shared a governess and a dining table and 22 years of watching our father love us in the abstract and fail us in the specific. And I think, she believes the warning she is giving me. She believes it completely, and she is also, in giving it, placing a seed of doubt in the exact location where I am most vulnerable to it. I'll keep that in mind, I say. She nods, and her eyes drop once to the amended contract on the library table, and then she turns and leaves. The blue silk disappears around the doorframe. I stand in the library for a long time after she is gone, just breathing, just thinking. I am beginning to understand that what is happening to me is not simply a business arrangement. It is also a chess game, and the pieces have been in motion since long before I entered the board. 2 women, same house, completely different cages. If you've ever watched someone choose themselves at your expense, and then had to find a way to keep going anyway, drop both cages in the comments, because Clara just did something extraordinary, and I don't think she even knows it yet. Stay with me. It is on the 5th day before our journey to Ravenscroft Park that I meet Viscount Hartley. His name is Richard Hartley. He is Edmund's first cousin, which means he is also in the absence of an heir from Edmund, the man who stands to inherit the dukedom. He is 31, auburn-haired, pleasant-faced in the particular way that men are pleasant-faced when they have learned that pleasantness is more disarming than any show of strength. He shakes hands warmly. He smiles at precisely the right moments. He asks about my family with the apparent concern of a man who genuinely cares about the answer. I would believe it entirely, were it not for the quality of his attention. When he thinks I am not watching him, I am always watching. He calls at Ashby House on the pretext of welcoming me to the family. He brings flowers, hothouse roses, deep red, the kind that require effort and money in November. He presents them with a flourish that is charming in its slight excess, and my father receives him with the particular warmth he reserves for men of title, which is to say with considerably more warmth than he has ever shown me. Hartley speaks to my father for 40 minutes. I sit in the room and am not sent out. I have been practicing staying in rooms by the simple expedient of not making it easy to remove me. And I listen. Most of it is pleasantry. But at one point, when my father is pouring the second brandy, Hartley says, very casually, with the ease of a man who has rehearsed casualness, "Of course, the contract amendment is a delicate business, legally speaking. I believe the original arrangement was with your eldest daughter?" My father's hand pauses on the brandy decanter. "A simple substitution," my father says, "entirely proper." "Of course," Hartley says, his smile exactly what it was before. "Of course. Edmund is nothing if not adaptable." He looks at me then, very briefly, a quick glance, warm and apparently idle, that lands on me and moves away like a finger testing whether a surface is warm. I look back at him, warm and apparently idle, and I think, you are collecting something. You are building something with information, and you are doing it with such care, such practiced pleasantness, that everyone in this room except me understands what you are building only as friendliness. I smile at him. He smiles back. We understand each other perfectly, without saying anything further. After he leaves, I go directly to the writing table in my room and write out everything he said, word for word, with the time and the context noted beside each remark. I have done this since I was 12 years old with people who made me uneasy. It has always seemed to everyone who has caught me at it an eccentric and suspicious habit. Today, for the first time, I understand with complete clarity that it is neither eccentric nor suspicious. It is the only reasonable response to a world that runs on information and lies about doing so. I fold the paper carefully and tuck it inside the cover of my Latin Virgil, which nobody in this house has ever opened. Then I go downstairs for dinner and speak pleasantly about the weather. Ravenscroft Park sits on the edge of the Derbyshire moors, and it is, on the November morning we arrive, the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen in my life. I had expected grandeur. Grand houses have a specific language, broad front steps, symmetrical windows, the architectural announcement of money and permanence. Ravenscroft Park has those things, but it also has something else. Something in the proportions, in the way the stone has gone dark with age along the north face, in the way the bare trees on the drive arch over the carriage path like attendants at a procession. That gives the house a quality less like a statement and more like a presence. It has been here a very long time. It knows things. It holds things, the house. Has the quality of a person who has survived grief and come out the other side into a different kind of quiet. I step out of the carriage and look up at it, and the wind off the moors hits me in the face, cold, direct, smelling of heather and frost, and something sharp and clean that has no name in the vocabulary of London. And I think, with a certainty that surprises me, yes. I don't know what I mean by yes. I only know that something in me, some cold, tight place that has been clenched since the solicitor's office, releases, very slightly, like a breath I had forgotten I was holding. Edmund is beside me. I did not travel with him in the same carriage. Propriety and a chaperone in the form of Mrs. Karen Forthright, the elderly sister of his housekeeper, prevented that. But he has stepped out at the same moment and now stands at my shoulder, looking up at the house as I do. Well, he says. It's extraordinary, I say. It's cold, he says. The boiler in the north wing has been unreliable since September. I've written to 3 engineers. The third, apparently, has actually read my letters. I look at him. He is watching the house with the expression of a man who loves something and is too careful to say so directly. You love it, I say. It is the family seat, he says, which is not a denial. We go inside. Ravenscroft Park is not simply a house in this story. It is a character. And what Clara is about to discover inside its walls is going to change everything she thought she had figured out. Don't you dare go anywhere. Subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're watching this at night with nowhere else to be, drop a comment that just says Night Reader. Those are my favorite people. The staff are waiting in the entrance hall, in a formal receiving line, which I was not warned about, and which requires me to summon every reserve of composure I possess. There is the butler, Mr. Jeff Hallmore, tall, straight-backed, with the dignity of a man who was born for his position and intends to die in it, and who looks at me with the carefully neutral expression of a man reserving judgment until he has more data. There is Mrs. Shelley Crane, the housekeeper, whose face does the same careful work. There are parlor maids and footmen, and a groom whose name I miss, because there are simply so many of them. And I am doing my best to hold each face and name and expression as they come. And at the end of the line, slightly to one side, holding a cloth and looking as though she has just remembered she is not supposed to be holding one, is a woman of about 40 with paint on her fingers and an expression of frank direct appraisal that I find immediately comfortable. Mrs. Heather Bramble, Edmund says, who manages the household accounts and also paints, although she will tell you the second thing is a hobby, and she does not mean it. Heather Bramble meets my eyes and shakes my hand. Actually shakes it, firmly, as a person does, not the limp social gesture of a woman performing deference to another woman. You're sharper than you're letting on, she says. Good. We've had enough decorative people in this house. Edmund looks mildly appalled. I like her immediately and without reservation. The rooms they show me are beautiful, in the way that large old houses are beautiful. High ceilings, elaborate plasterwork, windows that catch the gray winter light and do something interesting with it. But there is a quality of the unused about the place, a stillness in the corners that is not simply emptiness. Curtains drawn in the west-facing rooms, a particular careful silence in the corridors, the kind that comes not from absence of life, but from deliberate holding back of it. The way a household holds its breath around a wound it has not finished tending. In the music room, a piano sits with its cover down and a thin layer of dust on the lid that speaks of years rather than weeks. Lilies, Edmund says, following my gaze. A single word, a plain fact. But his hand at his side closes briefly into a fist before opening again. I look at the piano and I think about a household in grief. The particular grief that does not announce itself, but instead simply closes things, one by one. Like a person going through a house at night and putting out every candle until there is no light left and the darkness has become the atmosphere of every room. Did she play well, I ask. Remarkably well, he says. She also played terribly badly when she was in the mood for it, and she thought that was funnier than most people could understand. I look at him then properly. He is looking at the covered piano, and there is something in his face that he is not troubling to hide, which is unusual enough in him, this careful, guarded man, that it catches my breath. He is in this moment entirely unarmored. She sounds like someone I would have liked, I say. She would have liked you, he says. And then, more quietly, she would have liked someone like you here. We stand in the music room, in the gray November light, and the piano sits under its cover, and the silence between us is the most honest thing that has passed between us so far. There is grief in it, and there is something else, the beginning of a recognition. The moment when two people compare the maps they have been carrying and discover that certain coordinates match. I move to the piano. I lift the cover just a few inches. The keys are ivory and ebony, and in the gray light they are remarkably clean. I look at Mrs. Crane, who is standing quietly in the doorway. The piano is in tune? I ask. His Grace has it tuned every spring, she says, with a careful neutrality that contains, I think, more than it lets on. I let the cover fall gently back into place. I will leave that for now. I will know when the time is right. The East Wing Library is everything Edmund described, and several things he did not mention and possibly could not. 3,000 books is accurate in the way that a mountain is accurately described as tall. Technically correct and entirely insufficient. The shelves rise to a ceiling of perhaps 18 feet, and there are narrow rolling ladders on brass rails, and the morning light comes through the east-facing windows in long, golden blades that angle across the shelves and make the spines of the books glow with a warmth that has nothing to do with the coal in the grate. The reading chairs, deep leather, placed at angles that suggest someone arranged them for comfort rather than appearance, carry the faint impression of someone who used them regularly and thoughtfully. Lily arranged these chairs. I know it without being told. I stand in the middle of this library, and I understand in my bones, with the specific certainty of a person who has spent their entire life in a small space, suddenly placed in a large one. I understand that I am going to spend the rest of my life here, not in this room specifically, in this house, with this library, with this man who has his dead sister's piano tuned every spring even though the cover stays down. I understand this before I understand that I want it. And the wanting comes a moment later, quiet and certain like dawn arriving without announcement. I do not tell Edmund any of this. I am still learning the difference between what is true and what is safe to say aloud. The days at Ravenscroft Park settle into a pattern I had not anticipated. And the pattern is this: usefulness. Edmund has work. The estate is vast and imperfectly managed after his years abroad, and he spends his mornings with his steward, Mr. James Holt, a serious young man with ink on his cuffs who clearly loves the estate with the devotion of a person born into service and takes its difficulties personally. Edmund does not exclude me from these conversations. He mentions something in passing the second morning, a question about the tenancy boundaries in the South Field. And when I answer it from memory, from having read the relevant county records the previous evening, he pauses and looks at me for a moment and then continues as though this were entirely normal. It is not normal, but he treats it as though it is, and that treatment is its own kind of gift. Mrs. Bramble finds me on the third morning, with the household expenditure records spread across the library table, which had been left there, available to anyone who happened to be paying attention, And instead of redirecting me, she simply sits down beside me and begins explaining the notation system. She explains it the way she does everything, directly, without condescension, with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has spent years doing twice the work of men around her, and has long since stopped apologizing for her competence. The South tenancies are undercharged, I say, after 20 minutes of careful examination. By how much? Edmund asks from the doorway. I had not heard him come in. I turn. He is standing there with a cup of coffee, still in his morning coat, with the expression of a man who came in to retrieve something and found something unexpected instead. Something he is not entirely prepared for and is working out how to respond to. About 12%, I say. The rent review hasn't been done since your father's time. The land values have risen significantly, but the rates haven't followed. I pause. I am about to give a lecture on estate management to a duke who has managed his own estate rather longer than I have been involved with it. And I am suddenly aware of precisely how that sounds. I could calculate it more precisely if you would like. He crosses the room and looks over my shoulder at the accounts. He is close enough that I am very precisely aware of him, the warmth of him, the quiet reality of another person standing that near, and I am extremely careful not to react to it. You read ledgers like other people read novels, he says. Not critically, with something that I think cautiously might be delight. My father's accounts were in disorder for years, I say. I learned to read them by necessity. I learned most things by necessity. Yes, he says, he is still reading the column I indicated. I expect you did. There is something in that sentence that I am not sure how to hold. It is not pity. It is too accurate for pity. It is the kind of acknowledgement that a person gives when they understand the shape of your experience without requiring you to perform it for them. I'll have Holt run the numbers, he says. He straightens. Thank you, Clara. He leaves. I sit in the library in the morning light among 3,000 books, having just located a 12% revenue gap in a duke's estate accounts on my third day in his house. And I feel, for the first time in more years than I can count, that I am exactly the right size for the space I am occupying. It is an extraordinary feeling. I wish someone had thought to offer it to me sooner. I intend to be very careful not to let it go. If you felt what just happened in that doorway, the exact moment this stopped being a contract story, drop the map below. You know which moment I mean. Now keep going. The evening of our 8th day at Ravenscroft Park is when everything shifts, and it shifts the way things shift when they have been building quietly for long enough. Not with a crash, but with the accumulated weight of small moments, suddenly making itself felt all at once. We are in the library, late. The fire has been built up against the December cold, and Mrs. Bramble has long since retired, and Edmund is at the reading table with the papers he brought from London regarding a vote in the Lords, and I am in the chair by the fire with Montaigne's essays, which I found on the second shelf from the top, and which have taken up what I suspect will be permanent residence in my preferred reading spot. We have been like this for 2 hours, in the same room, in comfortable silence, with the fire and the books and the winter pressing against the windows beyond the heavy curtains. This is, I am beginning to understand, the most intimate thing I have ever experienced with another person. Not because of what is happening between us, but because of what is not required. There is no performance in this room tonight, no management of impression, no careful arrangement of self for an audience. We are simply two people in the same space, attending to things that matter to them. And the presence of the other person is not an imposition, but simply a fact that neither of us has moved to change. At some point I stop reading and look at the fire. "What are you thinking?" Edmund says. He has been watching me, I realize. Not staring. He does not stare, but with the peripheral attention of a person who is aware of another person, even when their eyes are nominally elsewhere. "I was thinking about my mother," I say. I don't know why. I say it. Perhaps because it is late and the fire is warm, and there is no performance required in this room. She died when I was 14. There was a surgeon for the last 2 weeks, and a nurse, and the house was very busy with the business of keeping her alive. I pause. My father was negotiating the sale of a parcel of land in that same fortnight, the same house, different business. Edmund sets down his paper. "He never came," I say. Not accusatory, just true. "I know," he says quietly. "I mean, I don't know specifically. But I recognize the kind of man who would do that. Do you?" My father was not so different. He loved his family the way some men love principles, in the abstract, with complete sincerity, without ever letting it interfere with what he actually did with his days. He pauses. I have spent considerable time ensuring I am not him. I am not always successful. I look at him across the warm room. He is looking at me with the careful, precise attention that is, I have come to understand, his most genuine mode, and there is something in his face that I have not seen there before. An openness, a willingness to be seen that is different from everything else he has offered the world. He is, right now, entirely without his armor. I stand. I am not entirely certain why. Some impulse toward the moment, toward the warmth in front of me, toward something I don't have a precise word for yet. Something between gratitude and recognition, and a wanting that is new enough that I don't entirely trust it. I cross the 3 steps between my chair and his table. He turns to face me. We are close. Close enough that the fire's warmth is between us like a third presence. Close enough that I can see, in the candlelight, the exact quality of the scar along his jaw. Not ugly, not deserving of pity, simply a fact of him, a thing that happened and left a mark. Like most of the true things about people, he is very still. I am very still. And then he says, very quietly, "Not yet." 2 words. He could have taken the moment. He didn't. Drop "not yet" in the comments if Edmund just became your standard. Because that right there, that restraint, that care, is the whole argument. Subscribe if this story is doing something to your chest that you weren't expecting tonight. 2 words. Not rejection. I understand that immediately. And the understanding is itself significant. Because I am used to interpreting refusal as rejection, and these are not the same thing. This is something more careful than rejection. A restraint made of consideration rather than coldness. He is not saying no. He is saying, when it happens, it should not be because the fire is warm and we are both unguarded, and the moment is simply convenient. It should be because we have chosen it. Clearly, with full knowledge of what we are choosing and why. I step back, I sit down. You are very careful, I say, to the fire rather than to him. I have been careless before, he says, to the same fire. The results were not good. For either party. There is a history behind that sentence. A woman who chose title over him, or money over him, or simply chose differently. I don't know the specifics and he does not offer them, but I can see the shape of it in the way he manages expectation. He has been hurt by wanting something that did not want him in return. He has built excellent walls around a repetition of that experience. I am not her, I say. No, he says, you are not. That is precisely why I'm being careful. We return to our respective reading, and nothing more is said, and I look at the same page of Montaigne for 20 minutes without retaining a single word. The fire burns low. The clock marks the hours. The winter presses against the windows. And in the morning, everything continues as before. But with a difference I cannot entirely name. The difference between a room before something is said in it and the same room after. The letter is in the study. I find it by accident. Genuinely by accident. And I want to be clear about this, because the circumstances of my childhood have given me a reputation for the opposite that I have never been able to entirely shed. I am looking for an atlas, specifically the one Edmund mentioned at dinner when we were discussing the Derbyshire boundary maps. I know it is in the study, because I saw it there the previous day on the second shelf to the right of the door. I am reaching for the atlas when the letter falls. It falls from the shelf above, where it had been leaning upright against a vertical spine, with the particular instability of a paper that has been placed there temporarily and forgotten. It falls open, face up, because someone has not sealed it, or opened it and failed to reseal it, which is a different kind of carelessness. And the first words are visible before I have touched it. My dear Lord Ashby, it begins, I should not read it. I have been in trouble my entire life for reading things I should not have read. I am the child who found her father's private correspondence at 9 years old, and has been called untrustworthy and secretive and sly ever since, when what she actually was curious and frightened and trying desperately to understand the machinery of a household that seemed determined to keep her in complete ignorance of its workings. I should not read it, but my eyes are faster than my principles, and what they have already taken in. In the 3 seconds between the letter falling and my reaching down to collect it is enough to stop me, enough to make me pick it up and read it properly, standing there in the cold study with the atlas forgotten at my feet because some information is too important to set down out of principle. The letter is from Viscount Hartley, written 2 months ago, before Edmund returned from France, before the contract amendment, before I entered any part of this story. It discusses in the smooth and pleasant prose of a man who has been practicing deception long enough to make it conversational, the precise legal grounds on which a contract substitution might be challenged. It notes with a helpfulness that turns my stomach slowly and completely that if such a challenge were successful, the original betrothed party would be required to either fulfill the original contract or face a public breach of promise action that would ruin her reputation irrevocably. Dorothea. He is threatening Dorothea. No. He is threatening my father through Dorothea. No. He is threatening all of us, each through the other, the way a man threatens a house, by finding the single load-bearing wall and placing his hand against it. I read the whole letter, slowly, twice, with the same careful attention I gave my father's account books at the age of 11. When I first understood that the numbers told a story, that the words in that house were specifically designed to prevent me from hearing. Hartley has known about the substitution since before it happened. My father told him, whether from foolishness or from some calculation I cannot yet determine, some attempt to use Hartley's legal knowledge as a shield. Hartley did not object. He helped. He offered his knowledge of contract law, with the generous warmth of a concerned cousin who wants his family's affairs to proceed smoothly. And in the final paragraph, in a tone so pleasant it is almost gentle, he noted that he would hate for any of this to become a matter for public discussion, that discretion was always to be preferred, that he trusted Lord Ashby, understood the value of a quiet alliance over a noisy legal battle. It is not precisely blackmail, but it is the skeleton of blackmail, carefully dressed in the good clothes of a concerned cousin, arranged so that any attempt to describe it as blackmail would look, to anyone not paying close attention, like paranoia or ingratitude. I set the letter back exactly as it fell. I take the atlas. I walk out of the study, through the corridor, upstairs to my room, and I sit at the writing table, and I write out every word I can remember, in order, in the careful shorthand I have developed since I was 12 years old, and first understood that information held precisely and completely has weight, real weight, the kind that changes the outcome of things. Richard Hartley has been playing a longer game than anyone in this situation has been aware of, and I have just seen his hand. The question now is what to do with what I've seen. I tell Edmund that evening. I choose the moment carefully. After dinner, when Mrs. Forthright has retired and the house is quiet, in the library where we have established the habit of spending our evenings. I wait until he has set down his papers and looked up, because I have learned in the past 2 weeks that Edmund receives information best when he is not in the middle of something else, when he has the full bandwidth of his attention available. Because he is the kind of man who, once he gives you his attention, gives all of it. I need to tell you something, I say, and I need you to know before I tell you that I found it by accident, not by looking. He looks at me steadily. All right, I tell him about the letter, all of it, every detail I can remember, and there are many, because I wrote them out, and I read what I wrote 3 times before coming downstairs. I tell him the date on the letter, the specific phrasing of the final paragraph, the particular quality of the help Hartley offered that made it something other than help. Edmund listens the way he listens to everything, without interruption, with his full attention, with the absolute quality of stillness that in him is not passivity, but concentration so complete it has the gravity of a physical thing. When I finish, he is quiet for a long moment. You remember the wording precisely, he says. Word for word, I say. I wrote it out directly after. He looks at me with an expression that contains, among other things, the kind of rueful recognition that a person has when they understand they have been underestimating someone, not in a harmful way, simply in the way of a man who did not know yet that the woman sitting across from him had been doing this, collecting, recording, preserving, since she was 12 years old, in a house that gave her nothing else to work with. Good, he says. He goes to see his solicitor in town the following morning. He is back by the afternoon. He tells me nothing specific, only that certain documents have been examined and certain preparations made. But there is in his bearing, in the particular quality of his calm, the settled confidence of a man who has looked at the battlefield and chosen his ground with care. Hartley will be at the December gathering, Edmund says, over dinner. I know, I say. He will expect to have an advantage. Edmund looks at me across the table. He will not, he says, simply. Finally, I believe him. And more than that, I find, turning this fact over carefully, I trust him, not blindly, not from sentiment, from evidence accumulated over 2 weeks of watching a man make choices that cost him something real. He turned a chair 6 inches in my father's library. He gave me a door out before he gave me any reason to stay. He said not yet when he could have said something much less careful. Trust built from evidence is a different thing than trust given from desperation or loneliness. It is slower, it is quieter, but it holds. I need you to do something right now. If Hartley already had you suspicious from the very first visit, if you clocked him before Clara did, comment caught him below. And if Clara caught him first and you missed it, comment Clara sees everything. This is the moment we find out who the real detectives are in this audience. Go. The days before the December gathering have a particular quality, the quality of preparation. Not the social kind, though there is that too. Mrs. Crane produces menus and seating arrangements with the focused energy of a general planning a campaign. Mrs. Bramble appears from her accounts room at intervals with questions about linens and extra candelabra, and whether the good port has been properly decanted. The house, which has been quiet for 2 years, with a grief it has not known how to release, begins slowly to come back to life. Fires lit in unused rooms, dust cloths removed from furniture, the long dining table polished until it reflects the winter light like still water. Edmund and I work. This has become, without either of us formally establishing it, simply what we do. In the mornings he deals with the estate business, and I sit beside him at the library table with my own concerns. The household accounts, which I have now reorganized completely, the South tenancy analysis, which Holt has confirmed is accurate to within 3 percentage points. A letter to the county surveyor about the north boundary wall, which is crumbling in 3 places and will cost significantly more to repair in spring than it would to address now. Edmund reads my letters before they are sent, not to correct them, but because he has established the habit of reading anything that leaves the house in connection with the estate. He has made 2 suggestions in 2 weeks. Both were good ones. I told him so. In the evenings we read or we talk. The conversations have become something I look forward to, with a specific, quiet hunger that I am cautious about examining too closely. We talk about books. He has stronger opinions about history than fiction, and I have stronger opinions about fiction than he does. And the arguments we have about this are among the most enjoyable things I have experienced in recent memory. We talk about the estate's future, about the tenants, about the boiler engineer who has finally arrived and whose diagnosis of the problem is both accurate and expensive. We talk about France occasionally in the careful way that Edmund talks about France. Not with the avoidance of a person hiding something, but with the considered distance of someone who has processed an experience enough to discuss it, but not enough to do so lightly. He tells me about Lily in small amounts over several evenings. Her laugh, which was apparently audible from 3 rooms away, and which the household both loved and used as an early warning system. Her habit of reading aloud to herself without realizing she was doing it. Her opinions about people, which were always direct and almost always correct. He tells me these things, the way a person tends a garden that has gone somewhat wild. Carefully, with attention to what is there, not trying to force it into a shape it doesn't want. I tell him about my mother, in similar small amounts. Her voice when she read to me, the smell of her room in the last weeks, lavender water and medicine, the particular grief of a smell that becomes associated with ending. I tell him that I did not cry at her funeral, not because I was not devastated, but because I had spent 2 weeks being devastated in private, And by the day of the funeral, I had nothing left, and for years afterward, I was ashamed of that dryness, that composure, that absence of visible feeling, because it seemed to confirm what people had always said about me, that I was cold, that I was peculiar, that I felt things at a wrong angle to everyone else. You were 14, Edmund says, when I tell him this, very simply, as though that explains everything, and it does, and I had simply needed someone else to say it. I look at him for a long moment. You were 14, he says again, quietly, and you had been sitting with it for 2 weeks alone. Of course you were empty by the end. I look down at my hands. I have never, in 22 years, had that particular thought offered to me, from anyone. Thank you, I say, which is insufficient and also the only thing there is. He nods. He picks up his papers, but his eyes stay on me for a moment longer than the gesture requires. And in that moment I understand that I am not the only one in this room who has been handed something they didn't know they needed. Dorothea arrives at Ravenscroft Park on a Wednesday in a carriage that is too smart for someone who has not been invited. She comes on the pretext of checking that I am settled and comfortable. She brings a hat box, a lady's maid, and the serene assumption that she will be staying for at least 3 days. Edmund receives her with perfect courtesy. He is extraordinary in social situation, performing the correct gestures with the efficient precision of someone who learned them as a second language and is fluent but not native. And within 30 minutes he has managed to be elsewhere. He is very good at finding reasons to be elsewhere. Dorothea finds me in the library. I have been expecting her. I am sitting with Montaigne, and I have arranged myself in the larger of the 2 reading chairs, with the deliberate ease of a person who belongs in the space and knows it. She notices this is immediately. Dorothea notices everything that relates to territory. She takes the other chair. She arranges herself in it beautifully. This is entirely involuntary, the way grace is involuntary in people trained from childhood to perform it, and looks at me with the particular expression she reserves for conversations she has planned in advance. He looks at you, she says, directly. No preamble, I keep my face still. He is a man who looks at things carefully, I say. No, she says. He looks at you the way he has never once looked at me, not in all the time. She stops, and in the stopping, in the small fraction of silence, is something real and unguarded that her usual performance never allows through. I didn't want to marry him, she says. I told you that, and I told you truthfully, but I thought he was cold, Clara. I thought he was simply incapable of. And then I see him here with you, and he is not cold at all. I look at her. I see her very clearly in this moment. Not the arranged beauty, not the golden performance, but the woman underneath, who was taught from the time she could understand language that her value was beauty and match, and who finds herself at the end of all that careful arrangement, looking at her plainer sister and seeing something she did not expect to miss. It is grief, what I see in her face, not love for Edmund. She does not love Edmund, I am certain of that. It is grief for the cost of the choices she made inside a system that offered her very few real ones. I feel, against my own best interest, a pull of compassion. Dorothea, I say carefully, you chose Reginald. Is he good to you? She looks at me, and then simply, all management stripped away. Yes, he is very good to me. Then what you have, I say, is worth more than what you are looking at across this library. She is quiet for a long moment. Outside the windows, the Derbyshire moors are grey and beautiful, and entirely indifferent to everything happening in this room. He will disappoint you eventually, she says at last, and her voice is almost gentle, genuinely gentle, the way she could sometimes be when we were very small and the world hadn't finished, teaching her that softness was a liability. They all do. I only wanted to warn you, because you have always felt everything so much more than I do, Clara. I don't want this to hurt you. It is the most honest thing she has said to me in years. It is also, in its honesty, the most precise wound she could have inflicted. Because she is right that I feel things deeply, and she has placed a seed of doubt in the exact location where I am most vulnerable to doubt. The place where I have always been told that my feeling things too much is a flaw, a weakness, a thing that will destroy me if I let it. Thank you, Dorothea, I say. She leaves shortly after, and the library is very quiet, and Montaigne says nothing useful. And I sit for a long time with the seed she planted, turning it over, examining it, trying to determine how much of it is genuine warning, and how much of it is the placement of a stone to destabilize ground that is only beginning to feel steady beneath me. Edmund finds me there an hour later, still in the chair, still not reading. Your sister, he says. Not a question. My sister, I confirm. He looks at me for a long moment. Did she say something to upset you? She said something true, I say, which is harder to recover from than something false. He sits down, not in the second chair, but on the edge of the reading table, close and informal and entirely outside the spatial rules of polite company, and he says, "What was it?" I look at him, at the scar, at the careful attention in his eyes that I have been learning to read for 2 weeks, and that I now know, with reasonable confidence, does not perform. She said I feel things too deeply, I say, and that you would eventually disappoint me. Silence. She is probably right, he says, about the first part. About the second, he pauses. I won't promise you. I won't disappoint you. I'm a flawed person who has spent years cultivating a talent for absence. But I will tell you this. He is looking directly at me, and there is nothing careful or managed in what I see there. I am trying. I am trying in a way I have not tried in a very long time. And I would like you to know that, not as a promise, just as a fact about what is happening. I look at him for a long time. That is enough, I say. For now, he exhales, very slightly, as though something coiled in him, something that has been coiled since considerably. Before I wrapped Ravenscroft Park has eased fractionally, for the first time in a long while. I also think about the letter. I think, we are as prepared as we can be. What comes next is not preparation. It is the thing itself. The formal gathering at Ravenscroft Park is scheduled for the first week of December. It is not a ball, something less formal, and therefore, in some ways, more dangerous. A gathering of the county's significant families, the kind of event at which positions are established, and the social architecture of the next several years is quietly constructed between the soup and the port. Edmund's decision to host it was deliberate, as I have come to understand most of Edmund's decisions are. If I am going to announce a change in the contract's terms, he told me, I would rather do it on my own ground, on my own schedule, with my own fire in the grate. I told him that was the most tactically sound thing I had heard him say. He looked at me with the shadow of a smile and said he had been taking notes. My father arrives with Dorothea in the early evening. Dorothea is wearing an extraordinary gown, deep rose silk, the kind of dress that arrives with its own weather system, that announces itself before the wearer has crossed the threshold. She has the expression of a woman who has made a deliberate decision to behave perfectly, and means it entirely, and I find, watching her enter, that I believe her. Reginald Cavendish is with her. He is everything Dorothea said. Young, warm, present in the specific, constant way that makes it clear that she is, for him, the primary fact of every room she enters. I watch him look at her, and I understand something about my sister that I hadn't quite assembled before. She does not need to be rescued. She found her own way out, through means I can fault, and she landed in something that is real and good and freely chosen. I hope she knows the value of it. I hope she treats it accordingly. Hartley arrives in the early evening, before the other guests. He is charming. He is perfectly dressed. He brings wine from his own cellar, as a gift for the house, and greets everyone with the practiced warmth of a man who loves people in general, rather than any person in particular. He greets me with the special warmth he reserves for me, that slightly elevated attention, that careful friendliness that I now understand is the attention of a man checking the position of a variable he is not entirely certain about. He greets Edmund with the ease of a cousin, the ease of a man who has known Edmund his entire life and who believes, I can see it in every gesture, that he holds an advantage. Edmund greets him with equal ease, with warmth even, with the relaxed confidence of a man who is entirely comfortable in his own house and has no reason to be anything other than perfectly pleasant to a visiting family member. I watch them together in the drawing room, and I see two men who are playing a game with each other, while the other guests arrange themselves around them like furniture. Only I and Edmund know what the game is. Only I and Edmund know where the board stands. Hartley does not know that I found the letter. He does not know that Edmund spent a morning with his solicitor. He does not know that the ground he believes he is standing on has been examined and found hollow in exactly the places where he intended to put his weight. I smile at him across the room when he looks at me. He smiles back, warm and easy. We are both performing, and we both know it, and the performance is flawless. Everything Clara has been building. The letter, the accounts, the 2 weeks of watching and learning and choosing. It all comes down to the next 20 minutes. If you've been paying the same kind of attention Clara has, drop I saw him in the comments. And if Hartley fooled you until the letter scene, drop he had me. I want to know which room you're in. Don't you dare leave now. The dinner is beautiful, Mrs. Crane and the kitchen staff have produced something extraordinary. 5 courses of the kind of formal English winter cooking that requires days of preparation and looks, when it arrives, entirely inevitable. The dining room, with its high ceiling and long table, and 100 candles reflected in the polished silver, is the house at its most magnificent. It is Ravenscroft Park announcing itself. It is Edmund, though he would not use these words, showing what he is and what he intends to continue being. I am seated at his right. This is a statement. Hartley is placed at the far end of the table. This is another statement. The rest of the guests are arranged around these 2 facts. The decoration on a cake whose architecture has already been decided. Lord and Lady Pemberton are present, the most well-connected couple in the county. The people whose drawing room opinion will determine how this evening is discussed for the next season. I note where they are sitting. I note how they hold themselves. I have been in rooms like this my entire life, watching how information travels and who carries it. And I know that the Pembertons are exactly the audience that matters most tonight. The dinner conversation is general, elegant, the kind of conversation that good dinner parties produce when everyone present is doing their social duty. It moves through politics and the season and a recent matter in the Lords and the peculiarity of this year's weather. And I contribute where I can and listen where I cannot, and watch heartily with the peripheral attention of a person who appears to be entirely engaged elsewhere. He is waiting. I can see it. He has a timing in mind, a moment he has selected, and he is moving toward it with the patience of a man who has rehearsed his approach enough times that it feels natural. It comes during the dessert service. He waits for a pause in the general conversation, a natural pause, the kind that occurs when one subject has concluded and another has not yet been raised. And into that pause he says, in a voice pitched to carry precisely far enough without appearing to be pitched at all. I wonder, Edmund, if the family's good friends present might be made aware of the situation regarding your betrothal. There are some questions, legal questions, regarding the modification to the original arrangement that I believe deserve public clarity, simply for the benefit of everyone concerned. The table goes quiet. Not immediately. There are 2 or 3 seconds of the last polite murmurs dying away, and then the silence arrives. The specific silence of a dinner party at which something has just been said that cannot be unsaid. I watch the room. I watch Lord Pemberton's face register what has just happened. I watch my father go the particular grey of a man whose errors are being made public. I watch Dorothea's face go perfectly still in the way of a person working very hard at something. I watch Reginald, who does not yet know what is happening, but who looks at Dorothea with the instinctive protectiveness of a man who has made that person his primary concern. I watch Edmund. He sets down his fork. He picks up his wine glass. He takes a single, unhurried sip and sets the glass down, and in the space of those 3 gestures, the entire room recalibrates itself around his unhurriedness. He has not been surprised. He has not been destabilized. He is, in this moment, the calmest person at this table, and everyone can see it. And the effect of his calm on the room is like the effect of a stone dropped into water. It spreads outward until it has reached every corner. "Thank you, Richard," he says. His voice is entirely pleasant. "You are quite right. There are legal questions about the contract. I am glad you raised them, because I have been meaning to address them." He sets the glass down. He looks at the table, at the whole table, at everyone present, a sweep of attention that is brief but complete. 3 years ago, a contract was signed on my behalf for a marriage to Miss Dorothea Ashby. That contract was amended without my prior knowledge to substitute Miss Clara Ashby. Miss Dorothea Ashby contracted a different arrangement privately. One that, I am reliably informed, makes her entirely happy, and which I have no objection to whatsoever. He pauses. The table is very still. "My cousin," Edmund continues, and his voice remains perfectly pleasant, perfectly measured, like a scalpel that has been warmed before use, has in his possession a letter written to Lord Ashby several months ago, in which he offers legal guidance on how such a substitution might be challenged, and implies, in a final paragraph that I have had the opportunity to review, that his silence on the matter has a value that might be called in at a moment of his choosing. Another pause. I mention this publicly not to embarrass my cousin, but because I believe everyone at this table should understand the motivation behind his present concern for legal clarity, and because I believe in clarity. Hartley's pleasant face does something remarkable. It doesn't fall. It doesn't crack the way faces crack in stories when the villain is exposed. It hesitates. One breath, too, in which the man behind the pleasantness performs a rapid set of calculations about what has just happened to his position, about what options remain available to him, about whether there is any move left that is not a loss. I only raised the legal point in the family's interest, he begins. The legal point, Edmund says quietly, is that I, as the primary party to the contract, have the authority to nullify it, modify it, or proceed with it as I choose. That is the legal point. He pauses. My solicitor confirmed this in writing as of yesterday morning. I believe a copy of his letter arrived at your address this morning as well, Richard. Complete silence. Lord Pemberton coughs. His wife looks at her dessert. Hartley says nothing. His mouth is closed and his pleasant face is doing the work of a man who has run completely out of moves and must now determine how to exit the board with the minimum possible damage. Edmund reaches into his coat. He produces the contract, not a copy. The original with the amendment and the seals and all the signatures. He has carried it here tonight on his person to this dinner, and no one at this table knew. He stands. He lifts a candle from the candelabrum at his right elbow, picks it up, brings it in front of him, and he holds the corner of the document to the flame. It catches, not dramatically, not with flourish or ceremony. The paper browns at the corner, and then the flame takes proper hold, and Edmund holds it over the china dessert plate in front of him, and simply lets it burn, quietly, without performance. The room watches, I watch. The bird seal, wings spread, pressed into dark wax, the seal I looked at in the solicitor's office on the November morning when my life rearranged itself around a document I had not been asked to consent to, melts and runs into the china plate like any other wax. The pages curl and blacken and become ash. The names on the contract. All of them, all the provisions and financial terms and careful arrangements made in rooms I was not invited into, become nothing. Become what all arrangements become when the people they concern have moved past them. History, paper, smoke. When it is done, Edmund sets the candle back in the candelabrum. He looks at the ash in the plate for a single moment. Then he sits down. He looks at me, not at the table, not at the room, not at Hartley or my father or the Pembertons or anyone else. At me. Across the 3 feet of white linen and silver and crystal between us. And his expression is the most unguarded thing I have seen from him yet. Not triumph, because this was never about triumph. Not relief, though there is some of that. Something quieter, something more permanent, something decided. Clara, he says. The room is entirely still. He asks the question. The same 4 words from the solicitor's office on the first morning. When he stepped through the door and found me in the wrong chair, and everything in his expectations had to be revised. Did you know? He says. I understand this time that he is not asking whether I knew about the contract substitution. He is asking whether I know what he has just done, what it means. What he is asking in front of everyone at this table, without quite asking it yet. I understand the question entirely. I have, after all, spent the past several weeks learning to read him. Yes, I say. His mouth curves, that brief held-back shape that I have been watching since the first morning, the shadow of a smile that keeps almost arriving and then reconsidering. It does not reconsider this time. It arrives, fully, quietly, entirely. Good, he says. Lord Pemberton clears his throat loudly and says something about the wine, and the table recovers itself with the practiced efficiency of English society, which has survived considerably greater spectacles than a burned contract at a December dinner in Derbyshire, and considers itself equal to the task of managing the aftermath. Hartley excuses himself not long after. He does not come back. My father looks at me from the far end of the table with an expression I have never seen from him before. Something between remorse and the dawning, very late, very insufficient awareness that what he did to me had a cost that he is only now beginning to perceive the shape of. I do not comfort him. I hold his gaze for one moment, steady and clear, and I let him feel the full weight of it. Then I turn back to the room. He will need to reckon with himself. That is not my work. Dorothea catches my eye across the table. She raises her wine glass very slightly, just a fraction. It is the most economical gesture she has ever made, and it contains, I think, an entire conversation compressed into a single movement. I raise mine in return. We are not repaired, my sister and I. What happened was real, and the damage was real. And some things cannot be mended with a gesture. But the thread between us is not severed. There is still something there, thin but present, the kind of thread that might, given time and care, and the slow work of two people choosing to try, become something stronger. He burned the contract before he asked the question, before he asked anything. He removed the obligation so the choice could be clean. If that just rearranged something in your chest, burn it below. And if you've been waiting for someone to remove the obligation before asking for your choice, drop still waiting, because both of those comments belong here tonight, after dinner. After the guests have settled into the drawing room, and the conversations that will become the county's currency for the next month, Edmund finds me in the corridor outside the library door. I am not surprised. I came here in part to be found. He leans against the wall beside the door with the ease of a man in his own house, and we are both very aware of everything that just happened in the dining room, and neither of us says anything for a long, comfortable moment. The sound of the gathering floats from the drawing room down the corridor. The particular warm murmur of a dinner party, resolving itself into the social phase, conversations, and laughter, and the movement of glasses. You planned the whole evening, I say. I planned the Hartley situation, he says. The rest was dinner, he pauses. Though I confess I had hoped you would say yes. You burned the contract first, I point out. Yes, he says, before asking. Yes, a pause, and the dryness in his voice that I have come to recognize as the specific shape his humor takes when he is also being entirely honest. I was fairly confident, based on available evidence. What evidence, I say, though I know exactly what he is about to say, and I want to hear him say it. You found a 12% revenue gap in my accounts in your third day here, he says. You memorized a letter word for word and transcribed it in shorthand within the hour. You made Mrs. Bramble smile in your first week, and Mrs. Bramble has not smiled at someone she doesn't genuinely respect since 1809 by her own account. He looks at me. You read Montaigne in the original French. You have never, not in a single conversation we have had, said something you did not mean, and you stayed. He pauses. Even knowing about Hartley, even knowing the full shape of everything, you stayed. He looks at me. Those are not the actions of someone who intends to leave. The corridor is lit by a single wall sconces, and in the warm, unsteady light his face is very clear to me. The scar and the careful eyes and the mouth that is no longer only almost smiling, and I think I know you. Not entirely. Not yet. There is a great deal of Edmund Ravenscroft. I have not yet had the time to learn, but enough to know that this is real, and that real things are worth the risk of wanting them, and that the ground beneath me is more solid than it has been in 22 years. Edmund, I say. Clara, I want to stay, I say, not because of the contract, which is now ash on a dessert plate, not because of my father's debts or the social necessity or any reason outside myself. I pause. Because of the library. Because of the way you turned the chair in my father's room. Because you asked. Did you know? Before you asked anything else. And because you gave me a door out before you gave me any reason to stay. Because this is the first choice I have ever been allowed to make for myself, and I am choosing. He is very still. Then choose, he says. Quietly, completely. I already have, I say. I chose approximately 10 days ago. In the library, over the estate accounts. I was simply waiting for the right moment to say so. That surprises a real laugh out of him. Brief, low, entirely genuine. The first time I have heard it. And it is, I decide immediately, one of the best sounds I have encountered in recent memory. 10 days ago, he says. The South tenancy figures were very compelling, I say. He reaches up and brushes one curl away from my face. Just that, just his fingers against my temple, the warmth of his hand close and real, and then he tips his forehead to mine, and we stand like that for a long, unhurried moment. Not performing anything for anyone, not managing impression or managing distance. Simply there. Simply two people who have found, through the most convoluted possible circumstances, something neither of them expected to find, and who are not in any rush to move away from it. This is not the ending of a story. It is the beginning of one, the real one, the one that belongs to me. You want to know what happened to everyone, I understand. Stories owe their listeners that completeness. The resolution, the accounting, the satisfying sense of the board being properly cleared. So let me tell you, Richard Hartley, Edmund's letter from the solicitor, the one that arrived at Hartley's address, the morning of the gathering, the one Edmund mentioned across the dinner table with the pleasant precision of a man placing a card he has been holding since Tuesday, was not merely a confirmation of contract law. It was a document outlining the specific legal exposure of a party who had knowingly participated in a scheme designed to leverage private knowledge as social and financial pressure. This is not a criminal matter in the strict sense. Courts do not concern themselves with the architecture of drawing room power, but drawing rooms do. Hartley spent the following season in his country estate. He did not appear at the spring gatherings. By summer, Mrs. Bramble's remarkable intelligence network, which is, I am now entirely convinced, the most reliable and comprehensive information operation in the county, reported that he had gone abroad for an indefinite period. Business interests, someone said. The particular vagueness of a person whose reason for absence is understood by everyone and stated by no one. Edmund and I said nothing publicly. We did not need to. Absence says its own things in society. The empty chair at the table tells its own story to anyone paying attention. I will say this for Hartley. He was clever. He identified a real vulnerability, built a real plan, executed it with real patience and skill. He simply made the error that all people make who mistake a quiet person for a passive one. He saw Clara Ashby, second daughter, invisible, unremarkable, the substitute, and he did not look carefully enough to see what was actually there. He will not make that mistake again, wherever he is. Lord Ashby, my father, is a man who has spent his entire adult life finding ways to avoid the full weight of his choices, and the universe, which keeps better accounts than most people expect, eventually presented the complete bill. The Ashby estate debts, whose true extent I now had full sight of, through Edmund's solicitor, and through the accounts I had been quietly reconstructing for weeks, required a managed sale of the northern land parcel to resolve. It was not a ruin. It was not the catastrophe my father had been frantically forestalling for years. But it was a significant reduction in circumstances, and it was public, and it required my father to stand before his creditors without the Ravenscroft connection to shield him, and to be, for perhaps the first time in his life, simply a man who had made a great many errors and was now addressing them at his own expense. He survived it. He wrote me a letter in January, 3 pages, careful, stilted prose that circled an apology the way a man circles a fire, close enough to feel the heat, not quite willing to put his hand in. He used the word regret 5 times and the word sorry once. At the very end, in handwriting that had gone uncertain the way handwriting does when a person is feeling something their pen is not accustomed to expressing. I know I failed you, Clara, he wrote at the end. I am not able to undo it. I would like, if you will allow it, to do better with what remains. I wrote back. I did not forgive him entirely. Forgiveness for wounds that deep is a long road, not a letter. Not a single gesture of accountability offered when circumstances have already removed the options. But I opened the door a small distance, because people who ask to do better deserve the chance to try, and because I am not interested in spending the rest of my life carrying the weight of an unresolved father like ballast. It does not suit me, and it would not, I think, suit Edmund's South tenancy accounts. Dorothea. She married Reginald Cavendish in March, in Bath, in a dress that was genuinely one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen on a human being, which is saying something, because I have now attended several Ravenscroft Park events, and the standard is high. She was radiant, not just beautiful. Radiant, which is a different thing. Beautiful is the bone structure, and the dress and the light. Radiant is what happens when a person is, underneath all of it, genuinely happy. I was her witness. She held my hand during the ceremony, briefly, in the specific way that people hold hands when they are saying something they have not worked out how to say with words. And I held hers back. And that was enough. That was, I think, the most honest moment we have shared since we were very small children before the world taught us to be rivals in a game neither of us designed. We write now. Letters, irregular but real, not the performed correspondence of sisters who are managing a relationship, but actual letters, the kind that contain actual things. She tells me about her house in Somerset, which is apparently smaller than she expected and better for it. She tells me about Reginald, who is as good as advertised and sometimes better. She is kinder in letters than she ever was in person, which I have decided to take as evidence of growth rather than distance. She sent me a letter after the wedding, a short one, and at the bottom it said only, "Thank you for being there." She meant several things by that. I chose to hear the most generous interpretation. We are, I think, learning to be sisters rather than competitors. It is slow work. The best kind always is. Edmund and I, we married in the spring. Not the grand social event the county expected. There had been sufficient spectacle at the December gathering to last several years, and Edmund is constitutionally allergic to unnecessary ceremony, and I have spent enough of my life being arranged for other people's purposes to have developed strong opinions about arranging my own. A small ceremony at the Ravenscroft estate church, in the company of the household and a few close friends and Mrs. Bramble, who wore a hat she had clearly been saving for precisely this category of occasion, and which deserved every occasion it would ever attend. She shook my hand after the ceremony, firmly, the same handshake as the first day. "You'll do," she said. "I have been given considerable praise in my life, and I have given considerable praise in return, and I want to be very clear." Mrs. Heather Bramble saying, "You'll do," is the equivalent of a standing ovation from anyone else. I will not pretend otherwise. At the altar, Edmund and I did not say extravagant things to each other. We have never been people who say extravagant things. "We say true things, which is harder and better," he said. "I choose you clearly, not in the abstract, not as a contract or a convenience or a solution to a difficulty, specifically, as this person in this place on this particular morning, Clara." He said it the way he says everything, directly, without ornamentation, meaning every word from the bone outward. I said, "I choose you too, and I intend to reorganize the remaining estate accounts, and I want full access to the East Wing Library for the rest of my natural life. And I have strong and specific opinions about the boiler situation in the North Wing that I expect you to take seriously and act on before next winter." There was a pause, the kind of pause that contains very precisely the shadow of a smile arriving and deciding to become the real thing. "Done," he said. "Done, done, and done." The witnesses laughed. Mrs. Bramble made a sound that was technically not a laugh, but was related to one. Mr. Halmore, the butler, looked at the ceiling briefly, in the manner of a man maintaining composure under pressure. Holt, the steward, who had been invited at my specific request because he is quietly one of the most decent people in Derbyshire, looked genuinely delighted. Afterward, when the household had returned to its evening rhythm and the candles were burning low, and the winter stars were doing their sharp, clear work outside the library windows, I sat at the piano. The cover was up. I had raised it the week before. Just opened it one morning while Edmund was out with Holt, sat down at the keys, played something slow and simple and not particularly well, and simply let the music exist in the room. Not a ceremony, not a declaration, just a thing that had been held back for 2 years, given permission to happen. Edmund had come into the music room that evening and found the cover up. He had looked at the piano for a long moment. He had not said anything. He had simply stood there for a moment and then gone to his customary chair in the library. And we had spent the evening reading, as we always do. But there was a quality to the silence that was different, lighter. The difference between a house holding its breath and a house that has very slowly remembered how to breathe. On the evening of our wedding, I played for a long time. Something slow, something Lily might have recognized, something that said, "The house is still here. The people who loved you were here. Someone new is here now, and she intends to stay, and she will take care of what you left." Edmund stood in the doorway for all of it. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That is, I think, the best thing I know about him. That he understands the value of being present without filling the space. That he knows when a moment is complete in itself and requires nothing added. "Before we end, I want to stay with you a moment longer." not inside the story but beside it. Because a story that does not leave you with something real has not done its full work. Clara's world is historical. The laws she lived under are not your laws. The contracts are different. The choices available to her were different and smaller and harder won. Women are not substituted into marriages like replaceable pieces in someone else's arrangement. Those chains, most of them, have been broken. But the human patterns underneath the history, those have not changed as much as we would like. The first thing this story is about is this: silence is not consent. Clara was never asked. Clara was arranged around, substituted into, slotted into a gap like a component part. And for years before that, she had been told that her habit of noticing, of reading, of understanding, was a flaw, was suspicious, was untrustworthy, was the behavior of a difficult person. In truth, it was the sharpest instrument she possessed. The people who called it a flaw were the people who needed her not to see them clearly. If someone in your life tells you that your perception is wrong, that your instincts are too sharp, that your questions are too many, ask yourself, honestly, who benefits from you seeing less clearly. The second thing this story is about is the system that sets people against each other. The system that trapped Dorothea trapped Clara too, just differently. Dorothea became her beauty because she was told that was her value. Clara became invisible because she was told she had none. Both of them were failed. Both of them were shaped by a world that turned women into arrangements, into financial solutions, into contracts to be amended and substituted without consultation. One of the cruelties of any unfair system is that it places the people inside it in competition for the limited space available. It makes sisters into rivals. It makes women measure themselves against each other, instead of measuring the size of the space they've been offered and asking why it is so small. The problem was never Dorothea. The problem was never Clara. The problem was what they were both standing inside. The third thing this story is about is the mark of real character. Edmund Ravenscroft was not a perfect man. He had been absent. He had cultivated walls. He had the particular damage of someone who had been hurt by wanting, and learned to manage their wanting downward as a result. But when he was tested, when the choice between convenience and integrity was placed in front of him, he chose integrity, not loudly, not heroically. He turned a chair 6 inches in a difficult room. He said, "Not yet," instead of something less careful. He gave a door out before giving any reason to stay. He burned a document over a dessert plate without asking for credit. Character is not what a person says about themselves in comfortable moments. Character is what they do when it costs them something real. And the fourth thing, the most important, is this: ask the question. Edmund's first and most consequential act in this story was 4 words. Did you know? Not an assumption, not a conclusion arrived at before the conversation. A question asked with the genuine intention of hearing the answer. 4 words that changed the direction of everything. We do not ask enough. We assume. We conclude. We arrange people into the shapes most convenient for us, and forget to check whether the shape fits. We forget that did you know? What do you want? How are you? Are you all right? Are the beginning of every real human connection that has ever existed. Ask the question. Listen to the answer. Not the answer you expected. Not the answer that confirms what you already decided. The actual answer. That is the whole of it. That is everything. If Clara's story found you tonight, if some part of this felt less like fiction, and more like something you needed to hear. I want you to do 3 things. Leave 1 comment telling me where in the world you are and which moment broke you open. Hit subscribe, because the next story I'm bringing you was made for everyone who stayed until the last word of this one. And send this to 1 person who has ever been the second daughter, the overlooked one, the substitute, the woman in the wrong chair who turned out to be exactly right. They need to know this story exists, and so it ends. The way the best things end, not with the crash of resolution, but with the quiet of a choice made freely by a woman who was never supposed to have one. Clara Ashby, second daughter of the Earl of Ashby, who was substituted into a contract without her knowledge, who sat in a hardback chair in a cold solicitor's office on a November morning and watched her life rearrange itself around a document she had not been asked to sign. That woman did not simply endure her circumstances. She read them. She understood them. She waited until she had enough ground beneath her feet and enough information in her hands and enough clarity about what she actually wanted. And then she chose, clearly, with both eyes open. Edmund Ravenscroft, who spent 3 years in France not thinking about a contract, and came home to find a woman in the wrong chair. That man did not do the easy thing. He did not do the convenient thing. He did the right thing, twice in front of people who were watching, at a cost to himself that he paid without complaint. He asked the question before he acted. He burned the obligation before he asked for the choice. He trusted her to answer honestly, and she did. That is what love looks like, not at its grand arrival, not in the burning of a document over a china dessert plate, though that was something. Love looks like 2 people deciding over and over in the ordinary fabric of daily life. In the estate accounts at 8 in the morning, in the library at midnight, in the music room where a cover has been lifted and the keys are clean and the house very slowly is learning to breathe again, deciding to see each other clearly and to choose each other anyway, not in spite of the difficulty, not despite the scars. Because of the fullness of what is actually there. It will have a lifetime of names, what they have. They are only just beginning to learn them. This has been She Was Sold to the Duke, her sister's betrothed, until he burned the contract for her. A story about choice, about clarity, about the extraordinary courage of a woman who learned, at considerable cost and with remarkable grace, that her own voice was worth hearing. Thank you for staying until the very last word. We will see you in the next story.